Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, Donald Trump's criminal trial gets underway as the process of jury selection begins. Also tonight, we'll hear from a Republican state lawmaker on what, if anything, is being done to address Arizona's recently revived 1864 abortion law. And we'll hear about the debut of the Phoenix Global Forum, which looks to address the Valley's bioscience, tech, and sustainability industries. Those stories and more next on Arizona Horizon.
This hour of local news is made possible by contributions from the Friends of PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. The first criminal trial of a current or former American president began today as Donald Trump faced charges that he falsified documents to cover up a sex scandal with a porn star prior to the 2016 election. The trial began with jury selection, but there were no jurors picked as more than half of the 96 prospective jurors said that they could not be fair and impartial. Process will continue tomorrow. Also today, the judge announced that he would not step down as requested by Trump. The judge also announced that he will address arguments that Trump has repeatedly violated a gag order, including commenting on witnesses. And the judge made a special point of reminding Trump and his attorneys that the jurors cannot be contacted or publicly identified, including making a list of their names. We will have much more on day one of the Trump hush money criminal trial in just a moment. Other quick notes: Apple saw a 10% drop in iPhone sales last quarter. That's a significant decline, and it's due in large part to slumping sales in China, which is the company's largest market behind the U.S. The falling sales numbers knocked Apple from #1 spot in worldwide smartphone sales, which it held after overtaking Samsung last year. Samsung now is back in the top spot. And Tesla will cut more than 10% of its workforce after reporting a sharp decline in vehicle deliveries in the first quarter. CEO Elon Musk notified employees today that the move was needed to help reduce costs and increase productivity. This comes amid a lower demand for electric vehicles. Tesla's stock has lost a third of its value this year. As we mentioned, the historic hush money criminal trial of Donald Trump got underway today with the start of what could be a long jury selection process. And joining us now to talk about the trial in general and what happened today in particular is Roy Herrera, former assistant U.S. attorney and the founding partner at Herrera Arellano LLP. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Officially begins with jury selection, none picked. Was that a surprise to you?
Not really, because I think it is going to be difficult to find a jury in this case. I mean, there's a lot of things that are unique about this case. Number one being that Donald Trump may be one of the most famous people in the world. So finding a jury of 12 people that can be fair and impartial, I think could be hard because a lot of people have predisposed views on Donald Trump. As you mentioned earlier, they started off the jury selection with the question of, can you be fair and impartial? And over half the people in the room said they couldn't, so they were immediately dismissed.
So, but what is each side now looking for in a juror?
Well, that's interesting. So what's going to happen now, and we started this today, is the jury selection process, which involves both sides and the judge asking a series of questions to the prospective jurors. Most of the questions today were kind of the normal questions you have at the beginning. What do you do? What's your occupation? How do you consume news? What do you watch? What are your views on sort of general statements or issues of criminal justice? But then they will get to things that are a little bit more specific. Obviously on the defense side, you're always looking for jurors that say are a little bit, let's say, skeptical of government power, right? And so that's the kind of juror I think you're looking for. Whereas the prosecutors are looking for jurors that, really subscribe to law and order and the rule of law. That's in general terms. But I think ultimately all this is going to come back to a political question. And the question is, can they find fair and impartial jurors that don't have political views on this?
Now, and again, I've heard that the Trump legal strategy is always delay. Just delay whenever you can, as long as you can. Is that going to be part of this particular process as well?
Absolutely. I mean, that has been their strategy in this case and all the other cases. He has 3 other pending indictments in other jurisdictions. But even in this case, most of today, at least the first half of today, had to do with a bunch of pretrial motions that the defense had filed, some of which were to try to get the judge to recuse himself, but others were related to evidence that could be at issue in the case, could be allowed in the case. And all of this, I think, was designed to delay the case as long as possible. But we're already seeing how long this is going to take with the judge estimating that this case could go at least 6 weeks.
How long the jury selection process, you think?
At least days, if not weeks. I mean, I think today, they only got through a piece of it, but I think it's probably going to take a week or two at least.
And let's clear up. I'm pretty sure our audience gets it, what this trial is all about. But for those who aren't sure, we hear hush money, we hear porn star paying off this to try to keep secret that. Falsified documents are really the key here, correct?
That's correct. So what he is being accused of, and this is, of course, is in New York State court. So this is a state criminal law. A falsification of business records is what he's being accused of. And it has to do with how he alleged to have hid certain hush payments to a former adult star, Stormy Daniels, through his former lawyer, Michael Cohen. Now, normally, the falsification of business records is a misdemeanor, but what the prosecutor in this case decided to do is charge it as a felony because his theory of the case is that the falsification of business records were done in conjunction with another crime. That other crime was a violation of election laws, both federal and state election laws.
So the idea of trying to keep this out of the public's eye because of the 2016 election, we'll call all the way back to 2016, that's where the felony comes in.
Exactly. So the whole timeline here is, if you can recall, back in the 2016 election, there was the Access Hollywood tape that had come out, and there was other allegations coming out of alleged affairs by Donald Trump. And the allegation here in this case is that he paid these hush payments to Stormy Daniels in order to make sure that case or that allegation didn't come out at the time. But he hid those payments through payments to his lawyer, his former lawyer, Michael Cohen.
Yes, indeed. Who will likely be a witness here?
Likely. And he was even named today in front of the jury as someone who would likely testify.
Yeah. Aren't there a couple of other hush money deals, and like with the National Enquirer we heard about? Are those things, A, do they exist, and B, would they be introduced?
So that was the subject of some of the pretrial motions today. The prosecution and the defense were sparring over whether other allegations of affairs would be allowed in, and the judge actually sided with Trump on this and saying that a lot of those other allegations were hearsay and wouldn't be allowed in. Notably, though, there was a dispute over that Access Hollywood tape itself, and what the judge decided to do is that tape will not be played in the trial, but a transcript will be made available to the jurors.
Interesting. All right, so Trump's defense. We've talked about delay, and I imagine denounce as well, because that's again part of the plan. But what is the real plan? For defense attorneys, what can they do in this case?
I think he is likely to make an argument that the violations that existed, this falsification of business records, were sort of ticky-tack, that basically there were technical violations under the law. As I mentioned, normally those are misdemeanors if they're charged at all. And I think he's going to try to make the jury feel like what happened here was no big deal, and that whether or not it was true that he had an affair with Stormy Daniels, the fact that he classified them a particular way at his business is something that he shouldn't be punished for.
I was going to say no big deal is not the best defense strategy, is it? That means, okay, I did it, but who cares?
It's not usually the best defense strategy, but everything about this is so unusual. I mean, you're going to have, potential jurors. One of the things I think they have to watch out for, even the prosecution, is that you may have potential jurors that want to be on this jury. Most of the time people don't want to serve in a jury, but in cases like this famous, you could run into a scenario where a juror actually wants to be on the jury because he wants to be famous himself.
Right. You think Trump's going to take the stand?
I highly doubt that. I mean, normally, as a defense lawyer, you would tell your client never to do that because it's usually not in your interest. But of course, Donald Trump is a unique person, so it's really going to be up to him no matter what his defense lawyers advise him.
And he was there today. Does he have to? Is he required to be there every day of this trial?
He is required to be there, and in fact, that became part of the discussion today because it turns out he needed to be in another jurisdiction on another case, and the judge reminded him that he needed to be there.
What if he starts acting up? And we heard reports that he was smirking and kind of making faces. I also heard a report he might have nodded off and fell asleep. But I mean, if he starts acting up, what happens?
Well, that's really interesting because this judge's demeanor throughout this process leading up to today, and especially today, is that he's a very no-nonsense judge. I mean, he's a straight-to-the-point judge. I think he warned everyone in the courtroom today that if there was any acting out, that he would either admonish them, hold them in contempt, or kick them out of the room. Presumably, that would apply to Donald Trump himself. So if he does things like that, I think he is going to get admonished from the court. We also have this pending gag order that he is alleged to have violated, which the judge did not rule on today, but it is going to be something that they consider going forward.
Hasn't Trump already attacked, like, the judge's daughter?
He has. And one of the things that also, going back to the the jury question that is going to be very unique here is the question of jury and juror safety. Because ultimately, the judge has made very clear to the defense that the identity of the jurors is not to be released at any point. But of course, we've seen on, I guess it's not Twitter anymore, but on Truth Social, that Donald Trump likes to attack people, including the judge in this case. And so the question is he going to follow that rule going forward?
All right, and the question, of course, is how long, and you're thinking maybe the end of May, somewhere in that, and this is the only trial, this is it, the only one that even goes to trial before the election.
Yeah, that's right. It looks like the other three cases, there's one in D.C., one in Georgia State Court, and one in Florida, are not going to go before the November election. But it looks like, just given the complexity of this case, all the witnesses that might testify, including perhaps Donald Trump, perhaps Melania Trump was somebody that was named today, that it's going to last about 6 weeks, which would take us to the end of May. Last
question, with all your years in the law and everything you know and everything you've seen, let's say he's convicted of the felonies. I think, let's say, I forget what it was. It's like 4 years max, I think, on each count. Does he go to prison?
See, that's one of those things where it's impossible to predict. We've never been in this situation before. My guess is if he's found guilty, there would be some sort of, either not a suspended sentence, but they would sort of delay sentencing until after the election, because I think the judge is going to be cognizant of the fact that he is the Republican nominee for the presidency. And so we have to sort of play that out. And I think that's actually precisely what Donald Trump is probably actually playing towards, because he knows if he's elected president, it's highly unlikely he ever goes to jail if he's convicted.
Now, we should mention that when the judge said that he would be the one handing down the sentence, that was when Donald Trump reportedly smirked in his journal. This is fascinating stuff. Good to have you here. Thank you so much for your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's powerful.
On Finding Your Roots, Alanis Morissette.
My family would often say, can you just stay still for 1 minute?
And Ciara.
I have a greater appreciation for American history and my history.
An ancestor stunt.
Can you imagine taking a boat over those falls?
What?
And a family secret.
Your biological great-great-grandfather was white.
Oh, wow.
Tuesday night at 7 on Arizona PBS.
Step by step Caesar is being corrupted by this power he's got. He is not going to restore the Republic.
His power grab is shameless, and the tide is turning on Caesar.
He thinks that no one could possibly be so stupid as to conspire against him.
Beware of the Ides of March.
Tuesday night at 8 on Arizona PBS.
The Arizona Supreme Court's decision to allow enforcement of an 1864 law that bans nearly all abortions has state lawmakers working to figure out how next to address what Democrats and some Republicans call an archaic law. Joining us now is Republican David Cook, who represents Globe in the State House of Representatives. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
You betcha. Let's just start with your thoughts. Should this law be repealed?
Well, I think that's where we're at now, and what I've done is try to get all of the facts together, because this is not what we've been focused on. We've been focused on bills and the process, and now we've just been given this. We've been waiting for a long time for the court to rule. Now the court has ruled. What I wanted to do is make informed decisions. So if we can say it's an 1864 law, that's true. Archaic, I don't agree with it, right? But it was reaffirmed in the 1970s by the Democrat-controlled Senate.
The late 70s.
As well,
yes.
Yeah, late 70s. So it's not that it's that far. They came back and said, okay, we want to reaffirm that this is the law of the land at the time, well before my time. What I don't like is I don't like it. I'm not happy with the 22 law that we also put in place after that. And I'm definitely not happy with the ballot initiative in which the Democrats are trying to put forward today. So if I had my way and was the kingmaker, then I would wrap it all up and fix all of the problems in one time. And I think that's where I'm personally at as a Republican. And we're now trying to get together as a caucus and see what kind of solutions we can come up with.
The 2022 law expressly said that this does not get rid of the old pre-territorial law. Was that a mistake?
I think that could be a mistake as we waited on that. But what I think is it's still going to get challenged in court. It's still going to be months and months of challenges and things that would be done. But I want to go back to what I want to say is wrong with all of them, right? So the life of the mother, absolutely a given, right? But as a Republican, a lifelong Republican, they also need to include the heinous victim. The victims of the crimes of rape and incest are forgotten there. They need to be included in all of that, right? I mean, it's horrific. I don't even like to think about that. But we need to look out for those people as well, because it is a fact of society.
Okay, but as far as repealing now the old law, which the court affirmed, and again, we got 7 days now to have some constitutional challenges, et cetera, et cetera. Are there enough votes, do you think, right now for a repeal?
No. No, there's not. And I'll go back to getting the facts put together.
What facts do you want to see? What facts are out there that you want to know
Well, the
about?
first thing I asked for is a legal briefing of if we do, right? First of all, what they were asking for is to take a bill that had never had a hearing in a committee. And I promise you that the majority, if not all of the members on the floor, except the bill sponsor or one or two more, had even read the bill. So what they tried to do on the floor procedurally was waive all the rules of the House and take a bill that never even had a hearing and stick it up on the board for a vote. That means it would not have gone through a process of a hearing, would not have the ability for amendments, and also wouldn't have gone through the rules attorney to find out if it's constitutional or not. That's the way the process is set up, and it's set up that way for a very good reason. The next step is, let's say we did pass that repeal bill. Two things to ask. What is the current law in Arizona? What does that entail if we repeal it? Is there an abortion law? That's a good question to ask, because then we might not have any. But also, down the road is, where's the Senate? Does the Senate have the votes to pass it? Do they have the same questions? Would it go through the regular order in the Senate then? Would it go from the House to the Senate to a committee? Or would it just go to the board there as well?
Well, or would it go nowhere? Like apparently the bill, there was 3 different committees it wasn't heard. I think it was introduced in January, something to the effect would get rid of this thing. It wasn't heard. Why wasn't it even heard?
Well, that's up to the chairman's prerogative. And I believe it was assigned to the Health and Human Services Committee, and that was the chairman's prerogative. That's what it means when you're the chairman, is you decide what bills get hearings or not. So today, what I asked for last week was, through all of this stuff, on the floor, the vote I took was whether to recess and adjourn or not, because we need to address this. Republicans need to get together and we need to come up with a plan. And today I'm happy with where we're headed. I think that we'll have more information to release on Wednesday. And the leadership is now getting together with the House and the Senate, and we are putting something together to bring forward.
Are you putting something together to refer to the ballot and let voters decide?
That's one of the options, yes. Yes.
Why would that be an option? We'll likely see something. I mean, the signatures still have to be affirmed, but we'll likely see something regarding abortion rights. What would something that the state legislature comes up? How would that be different?
Well, something that we would come up with is not what they're going to put forward on the other side of the aisle, right? What we would come up with, then you're giving the voters of Arizona a choice, right? So just to have one choice in which they were going to put forward, or we could possibly put another choice in front of the voters that say the limitations that include, like for instance, the ballot measure they're talking about, does it include the life of the mother in cases of rape or incest? Is there a week-long ban? And that's a discussion we need to do as a group, is say, okay, if we take these 3 things and we stick them on a side and we all agree on that, then we come down to the weeks where we have members of our party that 1 week is too much, 15 weeks people in our party that could live with, and so have other states. And then we have some people that on the other side that want to go to 25 weeks. We have to find the middle ground, and I think Arizonans deserve us to do that.
With that said, what happens Wednesday when you guys get back together?
We are mapping that out now. We're going to take care of the normal order of business. We're going to take care. We still have bills in the budget to work on for the state of Arizona. This issue is not as pressing as it is because, like you just said, there's 14 days left before it would become enacted. Whether it's constitutional or not, the governor's executive order has never been challenged by a county attorney that states they can't prosecute somebody, and now you have the attorney general saying the same thing. So if we just look at that alone, we're not in jeopardy at this point, neither are doctors.
So when I ask what happens Wednesday, last question here real quickly, what happens if nothing happens Wednesday?
Well, I assure you that the public may not see anything happening on the floor with our normal order of business, or maybe they'll see something that goes on Wednesday. But what I do believe is that we will continue to work like we have for hours today, right? I reviewed the legal brief that I was given that they worked on over the weekend this morning. I sent it to Legislative Counsel and I asked for them to concur with the findings of our House Attorney. That's how we know that we're on solid ground of, based on what we were just given, where are we at legally?
So the wheels are moving.
The wheels are moving.
All right, Representative David Cook, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
You bet. Thank you.
Phoenix is set to host the first ever Phoenix Global Forum, an event sponsored by Phoenix Sister Cities and the International Economic Forum of the Americas. And for more on the inaugural event, we welcome Rita Marco. She's president and CEO of Phoenix Sister Cities. Good to see you. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you.
Give me a better definition. The Phoenix Global Forum, what is that?
So it is a partnership with the International Economic Forum of the Americas, which produces these conferences all across the globe: Toronto, Miami, Montreal, Paris, Buenos Aires. And we wanted to produce a similar event here in Phoenix. It'll be an annual conference. This is the first one. And its intention is to elevate Phoenix's position on the world stage.
And basically what, like societal needs, industry needs? What's the focus here?
Economic development,
yes.
Foreign direct investment. So we tried to focus specifically on those areas that we think Phoenix excels at that people may not be familiar with. Obviously, people know us now for semiconductor because TSMC has put us on that map, but bioscience tech, water and energy, sustainability, aerospace. Those may not immediately spring to mind for people when we talk about Phoenix.
Defense doesn't immediately spring to mind, and that's an industry here of note.
Correct. And so we're encompassing that with our aerospace discussion.
Okay, so are you looking to what? Foster innovation? Are you looking for collaboration?
Yes.
Yeah, all of those things.
Yes, absolutely.
Best practices?
Absolutely. And to bring together CEOs, thought leaders, government leaders to explore those possibilities.
I know that I read something about leveraging friend shoring. What is friend shoring?
So I think people have been talking a lot about nearshoring, but nearshoring may be a little bit more restrictive. Friendshoring can be anywhere that we have an ally.
So basically nearshoring means working with folks that are near you. Friendshoring means working with folks that are friendly with you.
Correct. Australia, for example.
Yes.
Yes.
When you say working with first, let's say sustainability, we'll stick with that one there. How does this work? Do you have industry experts? Do you have those folks who are more innovative as opposed to those who are more practical and pragmatic? How does it work?
Yes. So let me give you a great example.
Please.
We have a wonderful company here called Bespoke Manufacturing. They are actually going to produce high-end garments on demand in order to keep fashion out of the waste stream. That's a local sustainable practice and it's in a microfactory that people may not be familiar with because they don't think about it being here in Phoenix. So we introduced that to some of our partners around the world.
Yeah. Auto industry, we just talked about earlier in the show about Tesla having to cut back because electric sales are down, and yet it looks like we're heading toward an electric highway here as far as the future is concerned. Mm-hmm. How's the forum looking at that?
So we're actually working with Nikola, and they'll be represented at the forum.
Okay. Reliable, I mean, when you say they're represented at the forum, they got to talk about critical minerals, reliable minerals. That is key to an electric future.
Correct. Freeport-McMoRan will be joining us to talk about that.
Okay. Biotechnology, advances, challenges. Yeah. What do you got there?
So Dr. Wondesford will be talking about CAMI and immunology. Dr. Gray will be talking about Mayo Clinic. We've just got, again, a wide array of experts coming in to share ideas with each other.
What about water?
Water is a particularly important one because I think, again, people think of Phoenix and think we're all dehydrating. And that's not exactly true, at least not for Phoenix. Other jurisdictions may have problems, but we've got SRP scheduled to come in to talk about water.
So basically you have all these folks getting together to say, what a swell place Phoenix is,
yes.
How well we've done X, Y, and Z. Are there going to be any panels for we need to do better with A, B, and C?
Well, I think the truth is that we need to do better on all of those fronts. Again, water is a perfect example. We've been very smart with water. That doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to innovate.
What does, and we only got about 30 seconds left here. So this is a forum, it's an inaugural forum, it's getting together, kind of celebrating and highlighting and also looking for best practice. What was done before the forum? How was this accomplished?
I think that it's been industry specific in the past. And this goes across all sectors.
Like silos, then, in other words.
Yes, so we're bringing people together to cross-fertilize.
What kind of response have you had so far?
It's been really good. The CEO lineup is quite amazing. My favorite is a woman who's building her own hydrogen airplane. She's a former rocket scientist from NASA.
Well, let's hope so, because that sounds like that's a pretty critical work. May 2nd?
May 2nd at the Arizona Biltmore, PhoenixGlobalForum.com.
All right, Rita Marco, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Coming up tonight at 7. At 8. At 9.